My name is Eric Pierson. I'm moderating the panel today, and the title of the panel as it appeared in the program is, do film students really need to know much about classic films? I thought before we get into the question that I would have each of the panelists introduce themselves and sort of give you where they are in the conversation about film. We have students, we have academics, so we have professionals, so we have a wide range of people to wrestle with this question this morning. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into our discussion. I would like to leave about the last 20 minutes or so for questions, because there's a lot of folks out here, and hopefully we'll stimulate some interesting discussion and dialogue around this issue. So, Richard.
We'll start off?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Richard Leskosky. I'm with the new Department of Media and Cinema Studies here in the College of Media. I've been advising cinema students for 35 years. And I've taught courses on history of cinema, animation, writing film reviews. This semester, of course, on film festivals. I don't see all of my students here, but and I write film reviews for the local newspaper, and have done other sorts of research relating to film and the precursors of cinema in terms of moving image illusions.
David. Okay. My name's David Bordwell. Until a couple years ago, I taught at the University of Wisconsin, Madison. I'm since retired, and I pretty much have the same area of interest as Richard. I teach film history, film aesthetics, national cinemas, particularly European, American, and Asian cinemas. And I'm interested in questions about film as an art, basically.
I'm Stephanie Ashton. I'm a cinema studies major here at the University of Illinois, and I'm a sophomore. And this is my first time coming to anything like this. So.
Doc Erickson. I did production manager, producer of feature films, just under 60 years.
I'm Justin Franklin. I'm a filmmaker from Los Angeles. I have my BA in Communication Studies from USD, and I do not think it's crucial to learn the classics if you're going to be filming.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Richard. I'm Richard Neupert at the University of Georgia. I also teach a wide range of film classes. I specialize in French cinema and animation and things like that. And I can't wait to hear Justin's arguments. Thanks.
I'm Howie Movshovitz. I teach film at the University of Colorado, Denver. I'm also a critic. I was at the Denver Post for 9 lousy years. And I've been at Colorado Public Radio since the Civil War. And I do features from time to time on Morning Edition and All Things Considered for NPR.
Okay, thank you. And I'm Eric Pierson. I'm the chair and of Communication Studies Department at the University of San Diego, in San Diego, where it's not rainy right now. Just to give you a little bit of the genesis behind this question, at the Sundance Film Festival this past year, Chaz and I were actually having a conversation about young filmmakers and how they had come to their craft, and this discussion came up about, well, how much does someone really need to know in order to call themselves a filmmaker? How much film do they need to know, and how do we gauge that amount of knowledge, and sort of who decides that? Because you often run into very creative filmmakers who will tell you that they don't see a lot of classic cinema, they don't engage it very much, and as a teacher of film, when I first heard that, I was horrified, but it's a question of debate, and as we start to think about film studies going forward, with the internet and with more of film screening being in sort of private settings, one-on-one, it's probably a good idea to start asking ourselves, well, what does the canon look like anymore? So I'm gonna just throw the question out there. Where do you come down on this question about what students need to know in terms of, do they need to know the classic films? And if they do, why do they need to know it?
Well, they need to know what other people have done so that they don't wind up reinventing the wheel or the tracking shot. But I think, a question here is that, well, we've had over 100 years of film. If you say that somebody should be familiar with the classics, what does that mean? That's addressing an issue of what is the canon, what should you see? But now that the canon is getting so large that if you tell a student that, you have to see all these films before you can start making films or start writing film criticism, they'll never get around to doing it because there's just so much to see. So do you need to see every example of 1920s Soviet montage or German expressionism? David's saying yes, but that's because he has several times. I think it's a real question. I mean, and the answer is yes, you should see as much as you possibly can, but you obviously can't see everything. And in fact, if you are interested in, say you just want to make musical films or romantic comedies, do you need to see all the classic westerns or all the classic film noirs? It's sort of a balancing act, a juggling act. Yes, you should see everything. Can you? No. So find the happy medium there, or unhappy medium.
David, I see you're writing furiously there.
Notes to myself. Actually, I'm sort of in sympathy with Justin because I think I'm going to give you the classic academic answer to any hard question. It depends. It depends, I think, on what your creative process is. It depends on how you as a filmmaker make films or how you think you want to make films. Because in the classic studio system, say the 20s through the 50s, I would argue most of those filmmakers didn't know the film classics. I'd be very surprised if John Ford studied The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, or Howard Hawks knew much about the Battleship Potemkin. And these were, of course, films that were contemporary films, but already being hailed as classics for them. What they did have, though, was an infrastructure that could train them in a tradition. So their creative process was very much embedded in the institution of the Hollywood studio system, and they didn't need to see films by Ince or films by Griffith, although probably they did see some by Griffith, because that was already, all those strategies of creation were embedded in the institution that they were being apprenticed in and learning through. So in a way, they got a film education through the business. At the same time, though, there were filmmakers of both, chiefly overseas, who were film nuts, who were cinephiles. People like Hitchcock, people like Ozu and Mizoguchi in Japan. These people watched, particularly American films, very closely. Hitchcock was very well versed, too, though, in German Expressionism and in Soviet montage techniques and so on. For his creative process, he needed that inspiration. He needed to see what other people had done so he could forge his own way. I think the same thing happens today. I think since the 1960s, we've come to expect, since the New Wave, we've come to expect that to be a filmmaker is to be very film literate, to have lots of classic movies at your fingertips. So a Godard or a Truffaut can reference lots and lots of American and French films in their work. And nowadays you have real film geeks, people like Wes Anderson or Paul Thomas Anderson, who embed their movies with lots and lots of references to the films they love. I suppose Scorsese would be the extreme example of that, but you get it even with Spielberg. That's generational, I think. For their creative process, those filmmakers had to come to terms with the past, either the past of classic films or the past of contemporary Hollywood. But at the same time today, you have great filmmakers, I think great filmmakers, who really don't know much about the history of cinema. I would pick out particularly two, Kitano Takeshi, the Japanese director, who is he'll confess, not a film lover. He doesn't watch films. He made his first film without knowing anything about cinema, really. And Ho Xiaoshen, the great Taiwanese director, who again was no cinephile. I mean, since he's become a famous director, he's kind of back-channeled his education and watched a lot of older films. But when he started, he was not a film lover or felt he had to know any classic films. But their creative process is very different from that of somebody like a Scorsese or an Altman or other people who sort of knew classic films. So as I say, I take the it depends position, that it really depends on how you make your film, what your guiding or visionary company is, and it could be in the other arts, it could be in literature, it doesn't have to be film.
Stephanie, weigh in?
Okay, I believe that it is important with any artistic process or any established medium to learn the history as much as possible. I mean, this doesn't mean that you have to go, like, I don't know, look up the top 100 films of all time and watch every single one, but I mean, you should, I think that it's important to know what has been done, because there's been over a century of like trial and error figuring out what film is, and so if you want to follow that or like make that your own thing, then you have this background that you can say, oh, I like this, I don't like this, and sort of build upon what's already been there. Or if you want to completely reject what's been done before, then it's important that you know what has been done so that you can, do your own thing. So that's
I agree, Stephanie, right. There's so much to be learned by watching the classic films, it seems to me, that you can't help but improve your attitude toward the making of a film and the creativity part of it. The use, the way the classic directors use the camera is something that is impressive. It impresses me. I watch attorney classic movies, and I'm intrigued by how John Ford used the camera, how Fred Zinnemann used the camera. I've forgotten who it was that said that the camera is like the information booth. So you bring the person up to it and do close-ups so that you can tell the story. But John Ford didn't do that. He had the wide shot with Monument Valley in the background at all times. But there are other things that John Huston does things in his films, small scenes that make you think about what the whole picture is about. For instance, the Misfits, the picking up of Monty Clift at the phone booth and the conversation that he made over the phone with his mother, and so on. Little incidents like that, I think, all fit into the learning process and can't help but improve your attitude toward how you want to sort of go, what direction you want to go in making your films.
Yeah, Justin.
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, the classics are a classic for a reason. I mean, they're great films. But I think as an artist, you're constantly trying to create your own unique voice, set your own path that's going to make you stand apart from anyone else. And by going in initially without even picking up a camera or writing anything down and studying all these other filmmakers, by the time you get behind the camera, you're going to have a head full of 15 other directors being like, well, Hitchcock did it this way, so I have to do this. Buktigar did it this way, so I have to do this. And how can you accomplish your own unique voice in that? As opposed to getting behind the camera and going with a feeling, saying like, hey, this feels great. This story is being told really well this way. And then if it doesn't work, maybe going back and looking what your predecessors did and saying, hey, well, you know what, this worked for him. Maybe I can incorporate a little of that into my film. So I just think that the more natural way to go about it was go with your natural instinct.
That's good. This is a fun discussion, because it's a question that also depends whether you're talking from an historian or whatever, but a lot of us for teaching, we have no idea what our students will ever do. Most undergraduates don't end up having a life in their area, so we have to define the canon in many different ways, I think, but especially for practical production people. I'll use our school as an example. Oh, but first I should give attention to. Page 37, since the French New Wave came up already. Sam Anderson I got to meet yesterday from the, I'll just call it the Ngabo movie. His little thing says, you know, he discovered the French New Wave at Yale University. So the notion, I think, that of them being able to make that the African movie yesterday without having known Italian neorealism, without having known the French New Wave, and how do you go out someplace where there's no electricity, where you don't have lighting units. It's not that they're just choosing not to use expensive stuff that everybody uses in the studio system, but they'd already studied how other people did it. How did you get by after World War II without electricity in Rome? How did they shoot Rome Open City? So to do that, so then to adapt that to Africa, I think is just really, really timely and important for someone like that. At Georgia, we've got a wonderful computer animation program. So when I teach, for example, animation history, a lot of them are like, you know, damn, we're not even gonna get to computer animation until the last week. You know, they just don't care. And then all of a sudden you show them Gertie the Dinosaur from 19-teens, and one of the graduate students ended up doing, he's like, well, this is really cool. You got this guy talking to the dinosaur in intertitles at that point, but he ended up doing his MFA thesis project, an interactive CGI, completely computer-generated motion capture, all kinds of things that was to him inspired by what Gertie the Dinosaur was back by Winsor McKay in the teens. Same thing with, we've got a number of students who've gone on to do internet companies and web pages and stuff, and one of them emailed me and said, you know, ever since I saw Felix the Cat,
We back.
number nine? That one's all right?
Loud, you're a teacher.
Yeah, he's
Okay.
got.
I can belt it out. But also, it's just, he'd seen Felix the Cat, and if Felix the Cat's that wonderful 2D graphic stuff. And that really helped him know how to use flash animation, the stuff, those irritating things on web pages where like the monkey runs across the top of the page over and over and that stuff, or the mosquito goes around on weather.com. And the notion of looking at 19-teens, 1920s, really harsh black and white graphic cartoons also really inspired a lot of them for how, you know, what to do with 2D when you can't afford the 3D of Pixar. So I think a lot of the old stuff comes back and gets reused and rechanneled in lots of really cool ways. So no, nobody needs to see everything to make a film. Although when I was at Madison with Professor Bordwell, and when I first taught Super 8 filmmaking, the cliches were just incredible. You knew every time somebody was going to do a breakup scene, they were all going to choose the exact same tree on campus and have the person weeping under it, or the exact same pier out into the lake all by themselves. So there's also this notion of cliche to see what are your contemporaries doing is just as important as to see what happened back in the 1920s and 30s. So you have to watch contemporary stuff and past stuff, I think.
Yeah.
You just reminded me that when I was a graduate student, a friend who taught film at the university, who had really started the film studies program, said that he was convinced that every young male film production student really just wanted to film his girlfriend having an orgasm. You know, it's interesting, by the way, that we're having this discussion because people with gray hair who come to film festivals like this have no question about this issue, right? That's an easy one. I have two different kinds of students. I have critical studies students who they're there because they want to look at a lot of movies and older movies and things like that. And then we have production students. And the production students just really want to get out into the world with their cameras. And there are two things that I always tell them. One is that they probably wouldn't try to learn French without ever hearing it spoken. And the other thing is that I give them the example of Charles Burnett. Charles Burnett is the director of an incredibly great film called Killer of Sheep and several other really fine films. And Charles says that he got to what he wanted to do in film, first because when he was a graduate student at UCLA, somebody showed him the Italian neorealists, particularly, he said, De Sica, and he learned what realism is, because realism is not just putting your camera out and looking at the world. He said then he saw Renoir, and that showed him what the poetic image could be. And he said, then one day somebody on the faculty there said, come here, you got to see this, and showed him some Ousmane Sembène, the Senegalese filmmaker. And Charles Burnett, who's black, said that's when he realized, contrary to his experience up to that moment, that the lives of black human beings were equally valid as metaphor compared to any other human beings. And he says that's how he became a filmmaker. And he didn't look at those filmmakers because he wanted to imitate them. It's that he wanted that inspiration and that insight. He didn't need to go do what Ousmane Sembène did. He needed to see it, though, so that he could figure out what he could process it in his head and make what he wanted to do.
Wow, there's a lot of stuff to pick up on. I just wanted to follow up on this idea of tradition and the canon and what that looks like, because I heard that one of the things that we're wrestling with is that the canon has gotten so large. And perhaps we have, those of us who teach film, and I'd like the students to weigh in on this also, is what are our expectations? Once upon a time, it like flying an airplane, when you get like one bag, I could take The Godfather and teach anything I needed to teach. And now in front of students who, that film means nothing to them. It has no, it's just, now I thought, well, gosh, what does that mean? But the question is, do we, as people who think about and talk about film, is it time for us to start thinking differently about the film experience, about what the canon is and what should be included and how we should then communicate that to our students? And so I throw that out there. Well, I'll start with Stephanie. What do you think you need to know?
Well, I think it's important to that I know just a general history of the different movements that have stemmed from, classical Hollywood cinema, and as well as the history of classical Hollywood cinema itself. And I don't know, just learning the stylistic techniques. What historical context created these different film movements. And how they've changed and created new ones today, and just sort of, I don't know, as far as the history is.
Okay. Well, I'm just curious. I mean, those of you who teach and engage in this conversation about film studies, what does the canon look like, and how has it changed for you as someone who has to deliver it to students? I'll start with you down there, Howie.
Well, it's interesting to me that the canon in film is so big, but I started life as a medievalist, and somehow the literary canon, by comparison, seems rather small. And somebody said to me the other day, "Oh, so you want to start everything with Chaucer?" I said, "No, Chaucer's late." But I don't know how the film canon got so big. I think it's because there are people like some of us I know on this panel who just like it so much that we think that you got to see everything. And in my own classes, I kind of blend it. I try to let students know that there is such a thing, but that you really have to be very relaxed about enforcing it and imposing it on everybody, so that I show sort of eccentricities mixed with major classics, major elements of, or parts of the canon. I don't, for instance, show Citizen Kane anymore because my students are sick of it. They hate it. And I don't blame them, because it's been pounded into them, I think, in ways that are not helpful. And when I teach film noir, I don't show Double Indemnity. I show The Setup and Detour. And I find that they're really glad to have sort of the pressure of the films they have to see taken off them from time to time. So, when you read the class, you have to, you figure out, well, who are these students and what's mattering to them and what's going to get through and what won't. So I guess I take sort of a half-assed attitude towards it.
Yeah, in fact, oops, it's still working again. The whole notion of a canon is important. I mean, there are titles like Citizen Kane, which I must admit I'm so tired of also. But every time I don't teach it, you get evaluations saying, why don't you teach it? Even though 3/4 of them have seen it in high school, usually in some setting that they didn't necessarily like the movie, but they just think you have to watch it. And you think, well, why? So one of the things we have to do as historians, Christian Metz, the theorist, also talked about history, and he just said, look, doing history is you create your own imaginary cinematheque. The memory of which films need to be preserved. And then you also have to say why. So if we really are teaching Citizen Kane because it's got a great intricate flashback structure, well, then we can show The Diving Bell, which many of them haven't seen either, the French film with a lot of mental subjective sequences as well. So it just depends what you're using it for, I think, in lots of ways. But certainly, it's good to have those sort of canonical titles under your belt, as well as the Where the Sidewalk Ends and Detours and things for film noir, certainly. But it is I think it's a real question to grapple with, which is, if you're teaching film history, and this will not surprise Professor Bordwell, but I was just at our big Society of Cinema Studies thing, and I was on a panel about teaching movies, and there was a person there who's been teaching, well-known in our field, who's been teaching 25 years, the same class on a quarter system, 3 times a year. He's never changed his films in 25 years. He's showing the exact same things, Antonioni's Red Desert and Citizen Kane and Bicycle Thief. And, there were a lot of people in the room who just thought that was normal, Basically, he prepared his lectures 25 years ago, and he's not changing, and the field shouldn't change. So that's like the other extreme. But certainly the whole idea of creating a mix for students, I think, is real important, and just constantly justifying why is it you're going to choose, if you're going to do a film noir, which one, and even why do film noir? And to try to convince them, well, you can't watch a contemporary film today without it saying a new film noir. Well, let's look what that really could mean in different contexts.
Okay. David, you do academic publishing, so where do you come down on the canon argument?
I've never really felt very close to the arguments about the canon, I guess, because it doesn't really figure very much in my thinking. As a scholar, I think it's typical of my generation that we sort of thought ourselves to be canon busters. I mean, the generation before us had sort of sanctified a body of film, chiefly silent film. But it was emerging that, yes, Rules of the Game was a great film, M was a great film. People were gradually discovering film noir. And I think that the people like me who started to teach in the 70s thought really everything is fair game. A lot of us were influenced, I think, by contemporary European film and the new energy of contemporary American film at that time. People like Spielberg, Coppola, something like Apocalypse Now makes you rethink the war film, for instance. So I don't think that a lot of the people who are my contemporaries thought heavily about a canon. If by canon we mean the X number of films, 20, 30, 50 films, that are valuable and interesting regardless of your interests, regardless of what research questions you're asking, regardless of what your preferences and tastes are, these are the must-see films. There probably is such a list, but I wouldn't want to compile it. I mean, to me, what's interesting about cinema is, in a way, every movie is interesting to me if you ask the right question about it. If you're asking questions about film and what it can do as an expressive art form, a lot of films become very, very interesting. I probably draw the line at porn. I really haven't seen much porn I found very artistically interesting. Not that I've seen a lot of it either, by the way. But I do think that a lot of films in all genres, all types, from all countries, can get activated and become quite interesting and valuable depending on the perspective you bring to them. So, for instance, to go to the practical teaching aspects, in a course, I might mix together a classic film, like, say, might teach M or something like that, but also a film like, say, Beetlejuice, Tim Burton's film, which I personally admire a great deal. I think it's one of his best films. But even independent of that, it's a fascinating exercise in how you play with a genre, how you take, particularly in that case, The Exorcist in the tradition of exorcism films, and do something quite creative and comic with it. That's the particular question I was pursuing, and so that film becomes lively and interesting. But that doesn't mean I'm going to put Beetlejuice on my list of the top 50 films of all time. So a lot to me depends, again, on what angle you're approaching the stuff from. And so ideas of a timeless or eternal canon don't interest me so much, I have to say. And I haven't tried to make that the cornerstone of my teaching.
Yeah, Howie had a point there.
I just wanted to add, it goes to what David is saying, that, for instance, when I started teaching film, you had to use 16 millimeter prints.
Right. Yeah.
And there was one film history text, which was written by somebody who kind of misremembered certain films. And that was what we thought of as film history. And it's changed immensely, because now there are thousands and thousands of films that are available to us.
Right.
And so we can think the way you're thinking about teaching film. I mean, the world of cinema is pretty much available now, and 30 years ago it wasn't at all. And I think the notion of a canon was almost just a matter of convenience, because those were the only films you could find.
That's a good point, that they got self-reinforced, that what the Museum of Modern Art distributed and a few other distributors, they were the canon because you could see them.
Or the illegal prints that your school owned.
Yeah. Or the films that you could remember from having seen years ago. And those memories might not, in fact, have been correct.
They often weren't.
They often weren't, yeah. There are a lot of film history books.
By the way, that's another 70s development, because it's in that period that people start, young people particularly, start researching early film seriously and looking at prints in archives rather than just relying on, as you say, memories of people who'd seen them initially.
You spoke about having these 16 millimeter prints. Did someone else want to speak before I go ahead, Doc? I'm sorry.
One of the things that's interesting, to me at least, are some of the classics, like, and what stays in your memory, what you take away from it. Lawrence of Arabia is a fabulous film, but everybody talks about the introduction of Omar Sharif coming across the desert, and that's what sticks in your mind. And in The Third Man, one of my favorite films, the introduction of Orson Welles, when you see the cat walk over his shoes. Things like, little things like that make a film. I think those are interesting things that you should pick up on.
All right.
Howard Hawks once said that if you have 3 great scenes and don't annoy the audience, you've got a good movie.
That's right.
Well, Doc, I want to pick up on your point. You talk about that entrance of Omar Sharif, which I have an appreciation for because I saw the film in a theater in 70 millimeter,
Right.
and that sort of progression from, in the distance forward was just magnificent. My daughter has seen Lawrence of Arabia, on a little screen like that. And so even though there's greater access to films, is that really adding to the discussion of film because there's such a, you have Netflix and the internet and things like that? How are students really, what are their expectations about film and what constitutes a film experience, and how what we saw last night, for example, seeing Apocalypse Now in that screen could never be duplicated in a classroom, and how that sort of impacts what we can do as far as talking about film. So, go ahead, Harry.
I now get to teach my film class in a theater, and it makes, right, I mean, you guys use the Virginia Theater, so it makes a huge difference. And I have students coming up to me saying, my God, I didn't know black and white looked like that. And I mean, it's really pleasing to me, I just shut up and show the films, because showing them properly or close to properly has a huge effect. And I realize that having taught in a classroom for years is really an inadequate way to do it.
Well, we actually just had a sort of a cinema roundtable we did at Georgia this year about the future of movies, and especially how students relate to films differently than we do and things like that. And it's not just it's partly the access, but one of the other things was we were talking about, we have a new art cinema in town, and they're having real trouble getting students to be a larger part of the audience and stuff. And one of the students just said, look, I'm interested in new movies. I'm interested in stuff that doesn't have a star. I know in some ways, but why am I? It's not the money. He said, it's the time. Like, why would I devote 2 hours to a movie that I don't really know I'm going to like? And it came down to texting. He says, the problem is, my friends might be meeting and doing something, so, that's why we're text messaging. We're not bored when we're watching the movies. We're just trying to say, is there something better going on I should go to? So there's this whole notion of, also, it's not just having, it's great to have Netflix, and I'm teaching an early film history class right now, and one of the students said, I'm going to write on such and such. I'm like, I've never even heard of this. What is it? And well, he was actually trying to look up something else on Netflix, and they suggested this. He might like this movie, and it was also from the 1930s. So like his canon is being driven by what Netflix suggests to him from 1930s movies, rather than like using David's book, which we're using in the class, and picking a movie from that or some of the other things. Yeah, Netflix decides what this person's canon to a certain extent, or even what they're going to write a college paper about. So it's a real different use of that access. And I think some of it's very exciting, and some of it's very, very troubling that, again, you're going to let a computer tell you what movie to watch. To me, is just like offensive. But also the notion that young people, I mean, that a lot of college students today, and I'd be thrilled to hear what Stephanie says, but a lot of college students today really do see movies as not some place you disappear for a couple hours and just get lost watching something on a magnificent big screen, but something that's almost like, oh gee, it's like going into a museum or something where I have to be quiet. I can't use my cell phone and I can't text very easily, or I'm not supposed to. Or am I supposed to? Nobody even knows the rules anymore. So anyway, it's a real different experience, I think, on lots of levels, and it makes it harder to teach in some ways and more fun to teach.
Justin, Stephanie, what do you, I mean, we don't want to talk about you like you're not in the room.
He's still staying.
No, I agree. I mean, I think, nowadays, as a filmmaker, most people they don't want to know if it's playing on a theater. They want to know what the website is. Oh, is it online? Oh, it's not. Then I'll probably never see it. And it's really sad. I had the privilege of seeing Apocalypse Now last night, and I still can't think straight. I mean, it was a great experience seeing that on the big screen. And you're right, it's just a completely different animal, and filmmakers today are all using digital because it's more convenient. And the medium's really changing. So, yeah, it's kind of sad, actually, for all you film classic lovers out there. And don't get me wrong, I love classics too, and I've seen plenty of movies. So I don't want to talk down on that.
Yeah, well, I agree. I mean, that the experience of watching a movie on the big screen is so different than like putting on a pair of headphones and sitting with your little tiny laptop screen where like you have to adjust it to get the right angle so you can see like the shadows and everything so they're not like the lighting's not distorted and I mean I've actually had to do that a lot for writing papers for class and everything, and I'll go to the undergraduate library and find something and I'll be sitting there watching it on my laptop and wishing that I could be in a movie theater, because the movies, I feel that it takes away from them. And especially with Netflix now that they're trying to move towards watching movies online, I mean, it's great to have that instant access, especially if, some people can, I guess, hook it up to their TV or whatever. And if you have a big screen TV, then it's closer to to watching it in a theater. But if you're watching a movie and then suddenly it pauses and says buffering, that it really it's just that's just not what I like.
Even today, when you're submitting your films to film festivals, many of them just want you to upload it. They don't even want you to send it in anymore. They're not going to watch it in a theater. They're going to watch it on their computer right in front of them. And so all that hard work that, if you shoot it on film and you're putting all that hard work on it to get it shown in a theater, the people judging if it's going to get in aren't even going to watch it in a theater. So it's something else to think about. So.
No, can I just say that's similar to the 70s and 80s when people were bemoaning that, oh my gosh, people don't shoot in CinemaScope. The cinematographers know what aspect ratio is going to be on TV, and so keep things in the center of the frame and stuff. And yeah, now people are bemoaning the problem with you have to shoot for YouTube. What's it going to look like this on a really crummy image? Is somebody going to download it? Are they going to want to look at it? And so yeah, things just shift in an exponential way, I think. But it's similar to some of the past shifts.
I remember years ago a very smart film critic who has a film festival in Illinois said to me, and he said to many people in a huge audience in Boulder, that you should always remember if you're watching a movie on television, you're watching television.
Do the 66 libraries still do projection or?
Film projection?
Yes.
No. No, the university about 6 years ago laid off all the projections, which kind of puts a big cramp in your film teaching capabilities. So now we all do videos and run the video projectors ourselves.
Oh, well, I'm a graduate from here and saw most of the classic films that I came to love in 66 Library, which they had a projection. It was projection at the time, and now it's sort of disappointing.
We have state-of-the-art projection facilities in 101 Armory now.
But no projectionists.
No projections, no.
Oh, well, that's...
I should say that probably some schools have taken a strong position on this. We've embraced film forever, and we're sticking with 35. We show 35 in a lot of our classes at Madison, and we certainly show 35 at our Cinematech, our sort of weekend film series. But more and more the pressure, of course, is to save money, don't rent films, have the DVD, don't use a projector with a union projectionist, have, just a setup where you can project. And clearly even archives are going in this direction. Some of the films we want to show from overseas are only available from film archives on hard drives because they don't want to send their rare prints around, and you get wear and tear on them. So it's kind of a rearguard action to stick with 35, but I think we still think that scale matters so much. It really, you saw it an extreme case last night with Apocalypse Now, where movies are made to be seen really big, and that's varied across the history of cinema. If you go back and look at old theaters from the teens and the 20s, the screens weren't that big, really. It's really in the 30s and 40s that the screens get bigger, then they shrink again, now they've gotten bigger again with IMAX and so forth. And filmmakers intuitively, and particularly cinematographers, do scale their work for the screens that they're aiming at. And as Richard mentioned, more and more in the 70s, filmmakers realized that films would mostly be seen by most audiences in perpetuity on a small screen, on TV or other monitor displays. So part of a movie like Apocalypse Now is just it doesn't just look better in a venue like the Virginia, but also it was designed to be seen in a venue like the Virginia. Whereas small indie films, a lot of them I think are made to be seen on small displays. People expect that mumblecore films, for instance, won't be shown on the Virginia theater screen. God, what would they look like, But they really are aimed for that more intimate viewing experience. And if the film is aimed for that, I don't see any problem with watching it on that kind of display.
Picking up on that idea of sort of audience and where people see films and how they come to engage them. Doc mentioned that one of the things that early filmmakers had, even though they weren't, they may not have known about other films, they had a structure in place that says this is what filmmaking looks like. How does film studies grapple with the tradition now where there's greater access to people who call themselves filmmakers, right? I mean, one of the things that stopped people from being filmmakers traditionally was the cost. It just was very expensive to get access to equipment and that kind of thing. Now, a couple of $100 and Best Buy, you go down there and suddenly you're a filmmaker. And how does that factor into what we do in terms of film studies, where a lot of the interesting work is being done online, YouTube, those kind of places that may not make it into books? I mean, how versed should we be in the internet as scholars if we're going to talk about film? So I saw David nodding his head. Do you want to?
I'm not very versed in the internet. I mean, we have a blog, but that's about as far as we go. Please don't anybody ask me to be a Facebook friend. I don't do Facebook. I don't understand Facebook. So I'm appreciative that people I don't even know want to be my friend, but I really just let me be, okay? But I do not tweet. No, I mean, what I say sounds like tweeting sometimes, but actually, no. But I mean, what's your question again?
Well, my question had to do with the role that the internet has played in sort of film studies and lots of interesting work being done out there, lots of filmmakers who that's really their only presence is on the internet.
To me, it's kind of going back to early film history, because if you remember, before there were feature films in the 1910s, most films were very short, a reel or less, I'd say 10 to 15 minutes or less, and they were shown in very distracting circumstances. Nickelodeon's typically ran a half-an-hour program of 3 or 4 films. You'd walk in at any time of the day, every half hour, you'd walk in, pass a half hour, walk out. It was a very small scale, short form, intimate kind of viewing, and the rise of the feature film sort of established a different paradigm. No, we go to the movies for an evening's entertainment, we see a feature, we see a couple shorts, we see a cartoon and so on. But before 1908, 10, 12, depending on where you start to date this stuff, people were very much into short form cinema. And in a way, I see the internet as reinventing early cinema in that respect, with very short little things, bite-sized, snackable films. That's a perfectly legitimate form as far as I'm concerned. People and creative things can be done with it.
Do you use it at all? I mean, do any of you use it in your teaching? Do you send people to specifically sort of say, see this on the web and not?
I wasn't in a situation when I was teaching to use it much, but I have sent links to friends, and I've watched some things on it that are quite interesting, I think. I wrote a blog about these videos that are, these one-shot videos that are lip dubs, as they're called, that celebrate, actually a couple of rival high schools in, of all places, Colorado, started to make these very intricate tracking shots where they lip-synced to pop music. I thought they were pretty interesting films, actually, and then there's a whole tradition of this lip dub cinema developing on the internet. I think it's interesting.
And I teach animation history, and at the end, we end up, I give them a whole bunch of web addresses and things to go to and watch things from around the world on YouTube that otherwise they wouldn't find, and to find stuff being made by 20, 25-year-olds around the world who are making short sort of calling card animation, trying to get a real job because they have to put it up on the internet. But certainly it does open up a lot of different avenues.
Okay. Anybody? I'm going to open it up to questions here in a couple of minutes, but I'm going to put the panel on the spot as sort of the last thing out there. I'm going to ask you to give two films that this is, one carry-on bag. Two films that you think that people who want to study film should see. So I'm not going to. You don't have to know 100. Just two, and if there's overlap, that's fine. But I'm curious as to when, because maybe there should be a discussion that says you gotta see this, but maybe not. So I'm just curious as to, since you got one carry-on bag, you can put a couple of films in it. You're teaching a class. What do you bring?
You're going to charge us $25 for it?
If it fits under the seat, it goes. Two.
Once Upon a Time in the West and Memento.
Okay. Go ahead.
Two Japanese movies, one by Ozu called Early Summer, and one by Mizoguchi called Sancho the Bailiff. As far as I'm concerned, cinema never got better than those two movies.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to say It Happened One Night and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
You get an A.
Forgive me, but Chinatown. And we've been talking mostly about the visual, but somehow the visual is used to get to the story. And the story is the thing that we have to have. And I'm thinking the second one, maybe it will be a classic, almost already a classic, Groundhog Day.
Okay.
I would say A Clockwork Orange and Apocalypse Now. Yeah.
What's the second one?
Apocalypse Now.
Gosh, I also would start with a French movie, Breathless, by Jean-Luc Godard, which is at the Osborne Fest, I guess, this week. They're going to show its 50th anniversary out for the Turner Classics. And then, there should be something animated in there. One of the things I would just say, I work on animation. A racist cartoon from the 40s says a lot about Hollywood, and I would say Jasper and the Watermelons.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. That's interesting film.
I'm going to go self-indulgent and schizoid. The Searchers and Agnes Varda's Cleo from 5 to 7.
Oh.
Very good.
Wow. Well, I predisposed myself to The Godfather, and this is A Face in the Crowd. Mm-hmm. Has a lot to say about us. So we're gonna take some questions for people in the audience. The best way to do that is if you just line up at the mic there, and then I'll call on you, and our panelists will engage your question.
That was a mean question you asked.
Without preparation.
You only get one bag. That's it.
Lots of movies can be jammed in.
Can you tell us your name so we know how to address you when you respond? Yeah.
Louis Rice from Atlanta, Georgia. I find it interesting how much you use the term film as you're discussing this. Justin is a filmmaker, where it almost seems that these days the term film is going to be like dial tone with a telephone, something that we say, and more people have no concept why it's called a dial tone. We're at the verge of people not knowing why it's called a film. If for no other reason, I submit that's a reason that you need to study the history of cinema. You call it movies, they're motion pictures, but what does that mean? It's a series of pictures that have been taken with a camera and projected on film, so on and so forth. The other thing that I wanted to comment about was the notion of making a film for YouTube or some lousy little iPod screen or something like that. And, you know, Phil Spector, who is now just a crazy guy in prison, but one of the greatest music producers of all time, specifically produced his music to be heard through a crummy AM radio speaker in an automobile because he knew that was the audience that he was going to, and made some of the greatest music in the world that way. So it can be done, I suppose. Interested in your thoughts.
Well, I agree with you. The term film is like we're hanging on because if you just start to use all-encompassing terms like media and that sort of thing, for me, it takes away from the idea of film. It becomes something else. So I don't know. I use film out of habit. If I want to stay in the Film Scholars Club, I have to keep using it, or they kick me out. I don't know. But you do raise a very good point. I'd like to hear how other people, because that is, I mean, it is a dilemma, because a lot of stuff that we see right now it really isn't film, it's digital. And so how do we embrace that?
Yeah, and I would just say that a film has such a cachet. When we have colleagues across campus who will say, well, like they're in the English department or Spanish department when they're teaching a film class or teaching film, and I say, well, why do you do films? Why don't you do something? Well, because of its cultural power. Everybody Well, then I say teach TV, and they're like, and they always look like. Video, like even just using the word video, it just loses something. So I think there's this sort of still this kind of old cult value to the word film. But you're right, the clarification of what medium we're shooting on and what we're talking about, I think is real important. But also for academics, it's been an historical issue. At the University of Georgia, film and TV were all in the same department for years up until the 70s. And as soon as they started shooting the evening news on videotape, they didn't need to use 16 millimeter anymore, so they just got rid of all their film classes and threw it all away. And then our department, the theater department, said, well, we'll take it then. So like TV and film were together, then they split off, and now it's like we're in different colleges and across the street from each other, and we should be back together. So there's also sort of the historical organizational notion of what is film, who teaches it. And so it's a really great question.
Yeah, I mean, there might be a distinction between film as a medium and a film as a unit. And if you think you take the second concept, that's probably not going to go away because it's not just a material thing, concept, a film. It's a formal thing. Just as a book, eventually maybe we're all going to be reading things on little displays like iPad and Kindle, but we'll still call them books, I suspect, because they have a certain structure of their own. And I think a film will be like that, whether it's on video or on some future platform yet to be designed. But film as a medium, and video as a medium, and digital media and so forth, those, you're right, we have to keep distinct, I think.
Yeah. Then too, if you're teaching a course on film, it kind of depends on what course you're teaching. If you're doing something on German Expressionism or Italian neorealism, it's film. I mean, there's no question about that.
Even if it's on DVD.
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm going to show you this film on DVD, but basically, you have to go back to the original medium. That's what I do in my animation class. I don't go past 1960.
Next question, please.
Hi, my name is Megan Matwichuk, and I'm a media librarian at the University of Delaware Library. And I got both of my degrees here, one studying with Professor Leskosky, hello, in film studies, and then one as a graduate student over at the library science campus here. My question, especially when we talk about access, it's often assumed that any film that we want to see is going to be available for us to see in any format, especially now that we've got streaming and digital. Something that I've learned how little I know about as a student of film and library science is things like intellectual property and copyright, and how major corporations are steamrolling academic interests and limiting the way films can be taught, both the critical studies side and the production side. And I wonder how much those of you who teach film, I know there's limited time for people to teach these kind of issues in classes, but I see it as becoming it's not an exciting topic, it's not a sexy topic, but it's so important. And those students also, if you've had any instruction in that area or education in that area.
I would just say it's a very, very good question, really pertinent. And once again, one of the things we've been doing is, I mentioned cinema roundtables. Every semester I host a cinema roundtable on campus, and we try to get people from the libraries. And one of our biggest audience chunks is we have the Peabody Awards and libraries at Georgia. So we get the archivists from them, and they, whatever the topic is, for the crowd and the audience, they try to talk about access, about legal representation, and really try to keep reminding us that, yeah, just because something's at Blockbuster doesn't mean everything's accessible. What does it mean to be accessible as well? So it's really important, but I must admit it's not built in the canon and into the academic structure, at least not from our school.
Well, and I mean, have you found as teachers that there's items that you wanted to share with your students that you weren't allowed to because there was some sort of barrier between you getting access to the film? Has that been a problem in teaching at all at this point?
You mean legally or technically?
Well, I don't know who's in the audience, so maybe we ought to stick to the technical part.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, in my classes, this animation class, I'm constantly, well, maybe not every class, but I'm frequently apologizing to my students because, I'd say, oh, there's a perfect example of this that I would have shown you, say, 6 years ago, but I don't have a projection, so I can't show it to you because it's on 16 or 35 millimeter. And also, and now, I was showing my students some examples. Of UPA animation, which is available only on 30-year-old VHS tapes made for a children's audience. So, and there are things that I have that I'd love to show them that are on laser discs, and what do you do there? You have to find that one or two rooms on campus that will still actually show a laser disc. So yeah, there are a lot of problems in terms of access.
It's an interesting contradiction, I think, because on the one hand, corporate media want to say that someday there's going to be a kind of celestial multiplex where you can dial in and watch any movie you want. Now, this is, of course, a fantasy. There are lots and lots of films, as Richard's indicated, that will never have any commercial potential, but may be indeed great films. But on the other hand, the same corporate media want to say, but we're going to restrict your access in all these kinds of ways, and your use of this in all these kinds of ways. A few years ago, when he was alive, Jack Valenti was at one of the Ebertfest sessions, and he talked about, but he let slip something quite amazing. Of course, he was here to defend property rights to the max, and to tape something off air was equivalent to stealing and stuff like this. But then he just sort of casually said, of course, we have no problem with faculty running films in their classes on DVD. And I sort of thought, what do you mean you have no problem? That's classic competition with the home non-theatrical market. And he just didn't bat an eye. So in some ways, I think they're very uncertain as to how to handle the situation. I mean, I think for all intents and purposes, classroom screenings, which used to count as public performances and thus had to be licensed, I think they've just gone by the board. I mean, with the rise of the internet, they've got a lot bigger things to worry about than whether Richard or I are showing a Disney cartoon in class. So I think that's quite fuzzy and quite unclear, but they're certainly aggressively asserting their rights to films in ways which nibble away at fair use, in effect.
Sir.
My name is Gerald Gucek. I'm with the Elder Hostel group, so we're all experienced film goers. I have a comment. The comment is about how the group approached a classic. To me, a classic is something that stands out from its genre, its technique, even they use the word canon a lot. It stands out in that it has touched human experience somehow and resonates with almost universally, if not universally, with a large audience. And I think putting it in a canon, talking about the techniques, that's part of film history or movie history, but it doesn't necessarily give you a classic. I thought you got the closest to a classic when you had to choose two films, two movies to take on the suitcase. And there, you did not put them in a canon, you didn't put them in a genre, you just came to some kind of a judgment. To Justin and to Stephanie, I don't think you need a classic to measure everything you do. That would be the wrong use of a classic, but I think a classic gives you perspective on human experience and how the film as a vehicle has approached certain areas of human experience. So it's an observation, and I appreciate your comments.
Okay. Thank you, Gerald.
No, that's a great point. I really, you said that very well. I completely agree. I think that's part of the turnoff is the way that it is approached sometimes, saying you need to learn this. If you can't be a filmmaker without studying this, and it's not about studying it. It's about getting lost in a movie and experiencing an emotion and wanting to recreate that emotion and stamp your name on it. And I mean, that's where it came from for me. So I completely agree with what you said. You should be a teacher.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Adam. I am also a cinema studies major here, same as Stephanie. And I want to know what I guess the different academics on this panel think about. You guys talked a lot about the picture quality and you have to show it on 35, and I completely agree. I'm actually buying a 16 millimeter projector. I'm really excited. Anyways, I'm wondering about sound, because Apocalypse Now clearly revolutionized sound, and then, in 2001, when the oldest, newest Star Wars came out, they reinvented surround sound again. And I'm wondering, where do you guys stand in terms of, how do you have to watch these movies in terms of speakers and your sound setup, and how important is that in truly appreciating a film?
I think it's, I cannot find a good theater showing the film Alien, which I think has one of the most impressive soundtracks, just the layering and the use of sound and rhythm. And I stopped teaching it because the sound was such an important part of understanding the film, and because I couldn't get the sound to be duplicated the way it was during the theatrical experience, unfortunately I've had to stop teaching it, which is disappointing. And maybe one day, as universities design theaters and that sort of thing, unfortunately, university theaters for showing film are not usually designed by people who have a love of film. They're designed by technicians who perhaps have different ideas. But I hope that if universities, for example, are going to add.
But if you're showing a British film from the 30s, the students can understand
steps,
it.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah, that's true. Like 39 steps. We used to show the 16 print, and it's like, what did she say? What did he say? Now it's like, wow, I never heard these lines before. Yeah.
That may be true for mono, but I think we have to say that also we have to remember that for DVDs of modern movies, the sound is remixed for home consumption, particularly of 50s and 60s films shot in stereo systems. If folks, a lot of you who will remember this, that in the old days, a film like Preminger's Exodus, people who are on the left-hand side of the screen, the sound is coming from the left speaker behind the screen. And if someone's on the right-hand side, the sound is coming from the right speaker. And the center channel is dead. That's the way they designed those films then. But no one with a home theater will tolerate that now because your speakers are flanked off to the side of your display, and it just sounds weird. But that's what the original film was like. So a lot of DVD releases are remixed for the assumption that of modern sound transmission standards. And this is a huge problem for archives, because if you want to study, say, magnetic track film sound in the 50s and 60s, archives can't play them back for you. There's usually an optical track on the film, so you can watch it on a flatbed viewer and hear the sound, but you can't hear the spread or the immersion qualities of the sound in an archive even, let alone in modern releases. So, I mean, that's another good example for why, of course, we venerate the Virginia Theater, but you're getting admittedly a remake, the Redux, but you're getting something like what the filmmakers actually intended in terms of separation. You're not always getting that. In fact, usually not getting that on a DVD.
And one other nice thing about DVD projection now in classrooms is you have the DVD projector up there on the ceiling. It's nice and silent, but Eric, you probably remember this too. Here, a projectionist would bring a portable 16 millimeter projector to the classroom. You'd get this in library screenings too, and set it up, and so you'd hear the clacking of the projector. I mean, maybe the projector tearing up the sprocket holes, and it would be coming out of one speaker in the back, right by the projector. So
Yeah, but I remember that, and a lot of the foundations around campus used to have like Friday and Saturday night screenings, and they'd set up the 16 millimeter. But that noise and that static actually became part of the joy of watching the film. So I kind of miss it sometimes. It's like the way DVDs have sort of cleaned up sound to the point where I miss that popping and hissing before the sound starts.
But also, just even, I still use 16 a lot in class for cartoons especially, like showing Duck Amuck. I mean, the great Warner Brother cartoon, if you show a DVD version, not only is it blue instead of white in the background, they've changed completely, but also you got like surround sound, hearing Daffy Duck's voice from the back of the classroom is just weird. So it's still much better to show it in 16. I'd rather have one speaker up front of the classroom on 16 millimeter and hear the clatter than have some remix thing that is completely inaccurate. And so it sounds really important.
Okay, great. And I'm going to ask that no one else get in the line for questions because I want to get through everybody, but we do have to clear the room for the next panel also. So please.
Hi, my name is Barbara, and I'm a current junior in Cinema Studies at U of I. And I think that the Cinema Studies program here is very classically based. I feel I'm very knowledgeable in the classics. Personally, I am watching the top 100 films of all time, including the ones that they took off the list when they revised it in 2007. I'm currently at 82, working my way there. There's 124 in total. But I find that personally, at least on this campus, the classics are very accessible and that you can get that basis not only in the classroom but on your own. Where I feel that it falls is that if we're talking about removing or maybe not putting as strong of a focus on the classics, then where are we putting the focus? Are we then putting that in more of the contemporaries? Because I feel that it's kind of harder to figure that out on your own. It's easier to find a book in the library or to, Google Cary Grant on Wikipedia and learn all about him and how amazing he is, personal favorite. But finding out about the contemporaries, I feel like it's something that is more of a struggle for me personally and for some of my friends as well, because that information is you don't know where to even start searching because you have the guiding point of your classic films and you want to do Howard Hughes, you want to search Jimmy Stewart, that kind of thing. You know where to go from the classics, but where do you start with the contemporaries and how do you integrate that into collegiate program?
Well, you can email David.
I have his book. I have had his book for many years. Classes.
But you can check. There are anthologies of contemporary criticism, and Rogers reviews are readily available in book form and electronic form. That's one way to start. Maybe one of the most accessible ways, I'd say.
Some of it's our fault too. In the fact that in order for this to happen, people with academic credentials have to write about it. And one of the problems with teaching a classic film like Double Indemnity all the time is I can find 14 scholarly readings on Double Indemnity that I can share with my class, so it becomes sort of a nice fallback position. But I think it really requires more work on our part as film scholars to actually start to write about those films and start an academic conversation, which will lead to more of the stuff that you're asking for. So we're personally responsible.
There are online scholarly journals too that kind of respond more quickly to contemporary cinema than print journals say. You can find scholarly articles online now about something like Avatar, for example. Not saying that that's a classic or anything, but just as an example of a recent film that you'll find discussed seriously online.
I'd also suggest that you listen to NPR sometimes, because NPR is the one broadcast medium that will give people like me 6.5 minutes to talk about an obscure Romanian film. You know, NPR will still do that. And, you know, it's open to many criticisms, but that's one thing that still happens.
Okay. Next question.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate your insights. You may have touched on this before I got here. My name is Omar Moore. I'm going to be one of the panelists on the next panel as a foreign correspondent for Roger Ebert. I'll be very brief. Restorations and Blu-ray, you may have touched on it. And I think of a film like The Red Shoes, which is now being restored, 70mm print. It's making its way around the country. But it's going to be on Blu-ray in July. And I understand what you said about the hisses and the crackles and the pots, but this film, I think, would really be, something would be added to a film like this when it comes to Blu-ray. What's your views on Blu-ray and restoration in general?
I showed a Blu-ray of The Searchers in my film class a few weeks ago, and the students were absolutely stunned. On the other hand, I've seen that restored 35mm print of The Red Shoes, and I mean, it's indescribably gorgeous, and Blu-ray ain't there.
One problem I find with Blu-ray is that, well, and sort of DVDs in general, is that, okay, I've got my 50-inch screen, and Blu-ray and DVD player, and I have a difficult time getting the exact aspect ratio onto the screen. You know, I put it in one machine, it gives me, you know, one aspect ratio, which kind of leaves some stuff out. I put it in another, I get a slightly different aspect ratio. So, you know, it's, yes, you know, reconstructions, but still not perfect by any means. And that's a big factor, I think, aspect ratio.
On Omar's question about restorations versus high-def and Blu-ray, we recently had some of the archivists from 20th Century Fox and the Academy come visit our campus, and the consensus of them was that they really have two audiences in mind when they do a restoration. One is they make the highest definition quality they can for disc or digital purposes, and that's for a general audience, and they really do try for maximum quality. But their reference quality is the 35mm print they put out. That they restore it, they have usually one 35mm viewing copy, which does circulate, like the Red Shoes example and so forth, and that to them is the original, or their original restoration. They'll never capture the original, but that to them is the benchmark for what comes later. So as far as the archivists are concerned, digital is a good approximation in many ways, but is not the 35 standard, which is still the archival standard. I mean, if you want to save something, you still put it on 35.
And of course, you know, no digital medium is considered archival.
Yeah.
Right.
Because as the archivist at the Academy, I'm sure he said it lots and lots of times, I heard him say it one time, he said, okay, you've done all of this work and you've scanned it and you know, you've preserved it. He said, what are you going to play it on in 5 years?
Yeah, the sort of standard catchphrase on the moving image archivists list is that DVDs will last forever or 5 years, whichever comes first.
Your question, sir.
Okay, my name is Bill Storm. I'm from West Hollywood, and I spent most of my life in retail management. In my days, we provided the customer what the customer would want. We didn't tell the customer, as we know today, you buy this. This is the way it is. And if you've seen Michael Moore's Capitalism, a Love Affair, I rest my case. My favorite film, there were two versions of it, Inherit the Wind. Today, we are given the movies that we are supposed to like. Up in the Air, Blindside, where are we going? Cater to us, please.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Your questions.
My name is Andrew. I've noticed that you're talking more and more about just watching movies and learning about them, but in a sense, I think you're learning how other people made movies and not how to make one yourself. So I think if you give a lot of cinema studies majors a movie to write a paper on, they can do that just fine. But if you give them a camera and tell them to do a rack focus, they're not going to know what to do. So, I mean, on campus here, we've got maybe 3 film production classes, tops. So, yeah, it's iffy occasionally. So, my thinking is, do you think it's more important to actually go out and make a movie yourself than to just sit there and watch them all day?
I'm gonna let the students tackle this one.
Go ahead.
Well, okay, as a cinema studies student here, yes, I would like to see more production classes. I mean, I'm signed up for writing with video, which I've heard is a good class, but I don't know how much of the technical aspects it really gets into. Yeah, I mean, I think that it would be beneficial to at least let the students try the different things and like see the different techniques for themselves and how you go about the process of making a movie.
You know, and I'm sure you guys know what my stance is on this, but, you know, you're what, 18, 20 years old? I'm sure you've seen a million movies by now. Like, it's not like you're going into this, never seen a movie, not knowing how to make a movie. I think first thing you should do is pick up a camera and go make it and develop your style, see what it is. And maybe at the same time, take classes where you learn from the classics and incorporate it together. I don't think that you need to take 2 years of learning movies to go make one. I mean, by the time you're an adult, you've seen plenty of movies, and you've seen the movies that are gonna, you know, make you want to make them. And as you go along, you'll have professors, you'll have people that will turn you on to more. I mean, you never stop growing. I mean, hopefully, well into your old age, you still see new movies that you've never seen before that are gonna get you excited. So, get a camera and start making movies. Yeah.
And actually, just as a teacher, I'm assuming students are shooting all the time anyway since teenage years, but we certainly encourage people to go out and shoot. But one of our problems for academics is we're also in liberal arts schools. This is not filmmaking school. And anybody who says, I want to be a director, I just always say, then get out of here. I mean, I think a liberal arts degree is wonderful for somebody who might want to be a filmmaker, but there are some people who just want, a full range of production classes. They really should go to a tech school and just do that and just be although I still think a liberal arts school is a much better way to learn about humanity and the other things we've talked about today, to what's going to be in the movie. But in terms of learning how to do a rack shot and stuff, certainly you should be able to do it in a production class or two. But from our perspectives, at least, delivering how many classes you would need to be a really professional filmmaker is just something that a University of Georgia or University of Illinois can't really do.
Yeah, I've got one more thing to say. Also too is if you want to be a filmmaker, I don't think that you need to go to a film school. I mean, you can learn the technical aspects of filmmaking in a day. I mean, just hiring someone that knows how to work a camera. You don't need to know that. I think being an English major or a history major, you're going to be opened up to stories and learning other people's stories, and it's going to give you ideas to go make your own movie. I mean, that's what it is. You're telling a story. And if I had to go back to college, I wouldn't go to a film school. I would have been, paid more attention in English and history.
I definitely agree with you, except for the learning it in a day thing.
Well, no, I'm not saying you can learn a filmmaking in a day. I'm just saying that you don't need to go spend 4 years learning how to work a camera to be a filmmaker. There are people that want to work a camera, and you can hire them for really cheap. So,
well, here on campus, we've got Illini Film and Video, which I'm president of. It's not just a shameless plug; it's actually a point I'm trying to make. We're a film production club, basically, and we've only got like 4 cameras that we can use. So I don't think it's a good assumption that people are shooting all the time, because we've only got the 4 cameras, and there's no other place to get them really if you're not like an art student in one of the classes. So most people don't have access to equipment, and they're poor college students, so they can't rent stuff out a lot of the time.
No, and that's true, but there's a lot of people that can tell a really great story, and the camera, they don't let the camera be the judge of that. They could tell a really great story with a $100 camera, and it's really amazing. So I think if that's your passion, make do with what you have, and at the right time you'll raise the money and get a good camera. So.
I want to get the last question before we have to go. And I also say, at UCLA, where I was a master's student in critical studies, we had to shoot and cut our own 16 millimeter film. And I have to tell you, that made me a much better film critic than having not had that experience of having to sort of deal with the process myself. So you will have the last word, my friend.
I guess I was wondering, you were talking about the movies you would assign in class, and I guess I was wondering, do you think, at least as a film teacher, you can learn just as much from a bad movie or a movie that really tries hard and fails than from a great movie?
Yeah, it's just not as much fun.
Yeah, I think that sometimes we place value judgments on things, but we also realize too that once upon a time this was a really bad film, and now 20 years later we're going back to it and we're saying, maybe there were some things going on here that I hadn't seen before. So I think, it depends on where you engage it at any given time. But as someone who regularly attends the Sundance Film Festival and sees their share of interesting films, I do think that you can learn from something that would be considered a bad film, but I'd be reluctant to give it that label because I think that oftentimes films change over time, and stuff that looked disoriented and disjointed today, 20 years from now, we're like, well, that guy was really ahead of his time. That was brilliant. We weren't at the place that the filmmaker was. So sometimes the filmmaker is just out ahead of us, and it's our responsibility to kind of catch up with him, that kind of thing. Anybody else?
You might also learn what not to do.
Well, that's true. Hey, thank you all. You have been wonderful. We're going to have to get out of the way because there's another panel starting shortly, but again, thank you for your time and attention.